open the door. Oh, I see the numbers growing here. My tally clicker is clicking off here, and looks like you know, the number of participants out there to the November 2020 member meeting of the Bristol Bay Regional Seafood Development Association is. I'm going to wait till the clicker, till the tally stops working. But anyway, welcome to all of you who have signed on. If you're missing any of your friends or fishing partners, do give them a text or a call and let them know. This meeting will be recorded so that you know, folks can review it again later if they need to. By way of introduction, I'm Fritz Johnson, current chair of the BBRSDA, and I'm going to pass this off to Andy Wink and Michael Jackson here very shortly, after singing a few sea shanties to you know, kill the time. No, I won't. Don't ask me to do that, please. But I think we're about ready to go. So if I could turn this over to Andy, he'll get us started.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Fritz. We'll kind of advance this here. We have a bunch of board members, staff, and some guests on the meeting today. And everyone will introduce themselves in just a moment. But I want to point out, if you're on a single screen and you're having trouble sort of seeing what's on the presentation, I believe you can just sort of minimize the thumbnail video. But don't do that yet, because we definitely want to have introductions. So maybe we'll go through the board members first, then staff, then our guests. But I'll just start. My name is Andy Wink. I'm the executive director of BBRSDA. And with that, I'll have the board members introduce themselves.
Michael Jackson, current vice president and chair of our marketing committee, as well as public relations, outreach, and sustainability committee member.
I'm Reba Temple. I'm the treasurer, and I have on my boat's the fishing vessel Cloud9.
Yeah, hi. Tim Cook. I chair the quality committee. I sit on the finance committee. I try to keep our money straight with Reba. So thank you.
Yeah, Patrick O'Neill. I had the fishing vessel, the Koi Cup.
Hey everyone, I'm Lalani Dunn. I'm at the BBRSDA staff. I'm the marketing director.
I'm Frances Bursch. I'm the program specialist with the BBRSDA and a fisherman on my family's boat, the Eva.
I'm Becky Machine. I am the financial administrator.
Going to Tradex Foods now?
Sure.
Tradex Foods, I'm Robert Ryerson. I'm the president and CEO of the company.
My name is Rob McNutt. I am one of the purchasers at Tradex Foods.
Good morning. My name is Nathan Brown. I'm one of the purchasers and salespersons at Tradex Foods.
Hi, I'm Janice Schreiber. I'm with Urner Barry Publications. We're a price reporting agency, and I'm a market reporter for both salmon and crab items.
All right, thanks everyone. Well, let's jump into it here. So just to kind of outline what we're going to talk through today, we did a fleet survey, and we've got some conclusions and some priorities and data to share with you from that. We're going to give a brief summary of what BBRSDA's goals and activities are. And then we're going to explain to you what our virtual Fish Expo is all about, and some of the things that we've got planned for this week and some of the resources we have available. There continues to be assistance options for, financial assistance for COVID relief. And we've got some information up on our website, and we want to make sure that everybody is aware of the various programs for that, certainly. But I think the largest chunk of our meeting here will be talking about market conditions and market analysis. And so how we like to do this is we'll have some question and answer with our guests when we come to the market section. And if you want to ask a question, simply type that question in the Q&A box. There's a little drop down that says Q&A and you can type it in there. Alternatively, you can raise your hand if you're a participant, and then we can essentially call on you and you'll be able to talk. If you are on a phone line, we'll do our best to explain what is being shown on the screen, but you can also raise your hand on the phone by hitting *9. And again, if you want, if you've got the box with all of our faces covering things up, you can minimize that or keep it up as you decide. So with that, I think we'll move into the slide deck here. So like I said, we did a survey back in August. We had 81 people fill it out, 81 fishermen, and we asked them, what do they see as priorities for the RSDA? The number one thing, I think, not too surprising coming off of this year, was to have market transparency and/or price negotiation. And then you can see number 2 was opposing the Pebble Mine, marketing, advertising, number 3, fishery management, number 4, and then fish quality coming in at number 5. These things are all very important, and I think as time goes on, and depending on the year, they can maybe shift around a little bit. But if you want to see the full results of that survey, it's there in the link. You can also just go to our For the Fleet link at the top of our page and go down to updates, and I guess you'll just have to scroll down to the September 28th there. So that was what our fleet felt like were the priorities for BBRSDA. Now, specifically about how to address the price situation, we asked people doing the survey to rank some ideas that we had heard, being presented to us or that were being talked about on social media. And so we kind of wanted to see, well, what's the real priority here? And it was pretty clear that getting transparency about the 2020 price was most important. We'd prefer to hear that transparency from the processors, but we're going to try and give you as much transparency as we can here today. Number 2 was ending the open ticket policy. That's obviously a big point of contention for this fleet. Going fishing without knowing how much you're going to get paid is something that a lot of fishermen would like to see ended in some fashion. A lot of people also rated getting more buyers in Bristol Bay as pretty high on their list. And then some of the other options, I think, come with various challenges, or maybe the thing about, direct marketers doesn't apply to everybody. So they tended to rank lower. Anyone on the call here have anything else to add about the survey and these sort of priorities for this year? Okay, I'll move on. Some other takeaways that we got from the survey, it would have been nice to have a larger sample size. We've talked about reopening this and trying to gather more input from the fleet. So be looking for that. I think we'll probably do that on the heels of this meeting. There was a lot of great comments and input, a lot of qualitative comments and things people typed in as commentary. So you can read that in the PDF that we've got online. It wasn't too surprising, but I think it just quantified and verified what we know, which is the vast majority of our fleet strongly oppose Pebble Mine. We asked people to grade on a scale of 1 to 10 what the ROI for BBRSDA was. And we came out at about 5 out of 10. I think it was maybe like 5.4 or something like that. But, it was somewhat polarized. I think coming off a year where the base price fell nearly 50%, I think there's obviously a lot of head scratching going on. And we'll talk about our goals and activities here shortly. And then we also asked, what does our fleet look like in terms of its political affiliation? And it tended to skew towards independent and Republican. although not to a huge degree. But independents and Republicans did make up over 70% of that small sample size, for those of you wondering about that. I'll talk real quick about our finances. Our budget by category works out there in the pie chart. For those of you on the phone, I guess I'll say sustainability was our largest budget category in FY20 at 37%. Marketing was second with 32%. And quality was 13% of our budget. And then org and admin were 18%. And, a lot of that 18% is org costs. Org are things that really support the rest of the programs. And it's not enough to just do something. You also have to tell people about it and do the outreach. And I think, a lot of things we do there, whether it's board meetings, committee meetings, doing PR and outreach, it just helps make our other projects better. So that's how we spend our money. We deficit spent in FY20. Our budget was a little north of 4 million, although I think with COVID affecting our ability to travel and to do some different events and activities, we'll probably come in well under that. But on the right there, you can see, our revenue is directly tied to how much the drift fleet earns. And so we've tended to be up around 3 million prior to 2020. This year with the lower price, we're expecting a pretty big pullback from that. But financially, we're in an okay position to weather this out, and hopefully we get back to higher values very soon. For our marketing program, I'm going to have Lonnie take you through our marketing activities.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm Leilani Dunn. Again, I'm Marketing Director at BBRSDA and your Bristol Bay Sockeye Salmon brand. I'm going to give a very high level and quick overview of how we've been achieving our goal, which is to increase the fishery value by raising demand for Bristol Bay salmon. If you haven't already, there is a pre-recorded presentation on our Fish Expo webpage on our site that dives into greater detail on our promotions, branding, marketing materials, and PR, featuring Kate Constantine and Christine Fanning of Rising Tide Communications and Mark Jones, our retail contractor. We've executed retail promotions throughout the country and have penetrated the market even deeper with media features on Bristol Bay fishermen in the promotion area. On this slide, we have an example at Hy-Vee, which is a retailer in Minnesota, and the promotion happened alongside a feature in their local newspaper, the Star Tribune. We had the same success recently in Colorado as well with King Supers and City Market. We executed fresh and refresh promotions in nearly 2,000 stores, which is doubling last year's count. And this is all in spite of some spring promotions that were canceled due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. Influencer promotions are very important. We are able to utilize their followers and also reach out to everyone on how to cook. Plus, there's recipe cards as well as point of sale. We have our media library available, a new wholesale inquiry feature, plus point of sale ordering, which direct marketers can take advantage of. We've had PR coverage this year on all the COVID precautions that we've taken for a successful season. We will be rolling out new marketing tools to further educate and help consumers prepare sockeye at home, especially while we are all at home going into 2021. Next slide, please. This is a capture. Before I wrap up, I wanted to share a few graphics that capture our digital presence. Here we have our website traffic, And I wanted to point out that Know Your Fisherman is our third most visited page on our site. And our most popular Facebook post from August was a harvesting image. And some of you might know Instagram, which is more geared towards food images, still had a lot of our images of the Bristol Bay area performing extremely well. So you guys are all not only so important to our brand, but also telling the story to our consumers here in the States and hopefully soon globally. Thank you. And I will pass it back to Andy.
Thank you, Lonnie. We have also a sustainability program where, the goal of our sustainability program is to maximize sustained yield. And, that's also a goal of the fishery managers. However, we've seen fishery management budgets for ADF&G cut over the years. And it's really important that if we want to get out to that, the end of that curve on the maximum sustained yield, that we have really good fishery management data. So BBRSDA has, along with processors and BBEDC and even individual fishermen, have put money into the Bristol Bay Fisheries Collaborative to shore up that management budget and make sure that core management programs continue to get funded. We've also supported the Port Molar test fishery and paid about half the cost of a second research vessel the last couple of years. And that really proved to be tremendously important this past summer because the Pandalis, which is the boat that's contracted through Department of Fish and Game to do Port Molar test fishery, that was laid up in dry dock. And I think due to COVID and a whole bunch of other series of unfortunate events, it was not able to make it to the bay. So luckily we had a vessel that was contracted to do Port Molar, and they ended up scrambling and found a stand-in second vessel that was quite a bit smaller to try to fish more of the transects as well. And so, having that second Port Molar vessel has allowed us to test and to test fish more of the area coming into the bay and get a better sense of how many fish are coming in and at what trajectory and where they're likely to go. So we're getting better data than we ever have before out of Port Molar. And actually this year, the fishery started off way behind where the typical curve is for the run. But we saw some big numbers coming out of Port Molar around very late June and first few days of July. And that translated to probably the biggest 7-day harvest this fishery's ever had. Also in our sustainability program, we obviously work hard to protect habitat. We've been engaging in the permitting process and have been engaging with stakeholders to protect against the pebble mine. As part of that, we sponsored a film tour for the Wild documentary. And we also fund a lot of research. The University of Washington's been doing some very interesting work around trying to use AI and machine learning to improve forecasting. They've been doing otolith mapping for a few years to get a better sense of where these fish are coming from in the watershed. And then we've got economic data as well as some other studies that are more pointed towards pebble. So, if you're interested in any of that, you should be able to find that at bbrsda.com/reports and read through all the nitty-gritty details. So with that, I'm going to turn the quality program over to Frances.
Thank you. I'm Frances Bursch, Program Specialist with BBRSDA. The goal of our quality program is to maximize harvest value by improving the quality of Bristol Bay salmon. This program tries to address quality in a holistic way, considering all the factors that do impact the quality of our salmon. A big piece of that is making ice accessible. BBRSDA supports ice barges. Ice is a we know not everyone uses it, but it provides an excellent return on investment to the fleet and really raises the quality of the pack and the price some people are able to get for their salmon when it's chilled. We're also working with research and development of new ways of testing fish quality. There's the Seafood Analytics has an interesting tool called the Certified Quality Reader that they've been using in Bristol Bay the last couple of years and in other fisheries as well. And they're actually doing a presentation fully on this project tomorrow at 1 p.m. Alaska time, and you can find a link to that on our website. We call it kind of quality gun, but it's a tool that measures the freshness of fish. As we know, sometimes temperature is not the only indicator of freshness. RSW is also a huge part of the quality program. One program that we have in the works is a RSW technician training program. There's excellent RSW technicians that work in the Bay, but as many fishermen know, there's often a pinch on how many boats need help with startup versus how many technicians are available to help. So getting more capacity for RSW technicians in the Bay is one of the goals that we're working on. We also work with Swansea. The REAP grant is a grant that can help fund the installation of RSW and other efficiency efforts on the boat. I also want to point to, we currently have a partnership with Seattle Tarp for 75% off of insulated ice bags. Boats that use ice, or even those that rely on RSW but want to be ready in case that breaks down, the ice bags are useful there. I think ready for the next one. PR outreach program, I think, is our newest committee. And the goal of this committee is to engage with the fleet and others to further our mission. So this, through our PRO, is how we hosted the fleet survey we held. This is kind of where we focus our energy for the photo contest, which I thank everyone who participated in that. We got some great shots. We love seeing those kind of glimpses of people's Bristol Bay experiences and stories, and we use those to continue to do our PR and outreach, and the marketing committee uses that as well to tell the Bristol Bay story. So thank you for submitting those. PR outreach is also, we try to get the market info to members. There's a page always on our site that we continue to update with market information. Our Facebook is also a great place that gets updated with new market information. The merch, our Bristol Bay Sockeye Salmon apparel is new this year, and fishermen are our best ambassadors for fish, and the Bristol Bay Sockeye brand belongs to all of us, and the merch is a good way to help fishermen be the ambassadors and represent the Bristol Bay Sockeye Salmon brand throughout the year. We will be putting out an annual report this year just in hopes of improving our communication with the fleet. So we'll be seeing that later in 2021. There are some set netters who have been asking about and interested in joining the BBRSDA. So we've been continuing to have conversations about that and see where that goes. We also promote safety training and equipment. There's currently, through LFS and CMARS, discounts on safety gear. You can find that at our EXPO website too right now. And we tried to host safety training as well. That might be somewhat limited this year with COVID, but we'll do our best to provide that pre-season. Go to the next one.
Thanks, Francis. I'll just add too, our website, we try to put as much info on there as possible, but you can also kind of stay in touch with us through Facebook, Instagram, and if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do so. We try to put all that info out once a month. So we'll go to the next slide here.
Hey, Andy.
Go ahead, Tim.
Andy, can you go back 2 slides to the quality? And I just want to say, you know, the quality program, we just amended the goal to include the word maximize harvest value, because sometimes it's easy to get short-sighted and say we need to improve quality without recognizing that the RSDA, our real purpose here is to maximize value to our members. And so we specifically put that in so that when we do quality programs, we're looking at maximizing value to our permit holders and members. And I think we do that throughout the RSDA, but I think it just needs to be highlighted. That's why we exist. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, you bet. And definitely, I mean, whether it's outreach, whether it's sustainability, quality, and certainly marketing, everything is geared towards how do we maximize the value of this fishery. You know, even safety, the safety discounts and things like that, it's a very, very small part of our budget. And usually we are able to get those discounts extended to you guys sort of in kind for us just promoting it because we have a large fishery and you know, and a large fleet to engage with. So typically we don't spend either any money on it or very little at all. And, you know, I'd say you can't reap the rewards of a good Bristol Bay season if you don't survive it. So, you know, safety, I think, does have a part to play in our organization and in our fishery. Francis, do you want to talk about our virtual fish expo a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a webpage up. It's our homepage. If you go to BBRSDA, it's also at BBRSDA/Fish Expo. Many of you probably got here from there. So thank you for checking that out. We miss being in person, and we're doing our best to kind of replicate some of the benefits and opportunities that we have with regular Fish Expo. So we've coordinated some expert presentations. You'll find kind of at the bottom of the page, and interesting stuff on machine learning for salmon forecasting, and presentations from our marketing committee, and a lot more there. We have a virtual Zoom booth, and so right after this meeting and tomorrow from 9 to 3 Alaska time, staff and I think board members and other representatives will pop in. We'll be available, so you can just join the Zoom call if you just want to say hi to us. We'd love to see you. If you have questions or concerns, you're welcome to join us that way as well. I just mentioned it, but there are safety discounts and discounts on ice bags there. Please do check out the photo gallery of the photo contest winners, really beautiful pictures of Bristol Bay. Tools for direct marketers. The marketing program, you know, does all retail and big marketing efforts of Bristol Bay salmon, but also have tools for direct marketers, and it's really important to us to support the fishermen who are selling their own catches. Also a link to market information, which we'll get into more in this presentation, but links to dive deeper there.
Do you want to talk about the assistance options for fishermen?
Yes. Yeah, I just want to point out some of the assistance programs that are open and some that will be opening soon. So currently, the Seafood Trade Relief Program is open through December 14th. This one is less COVID related and more related to trade sanctions, and fishermen can receive 16 cents a pound on 2019 salmon landings. So that is some support you can apply for. And we have links to the links here at the bottom of the page, but BBRSDA/COVID-19, we have links to all of this information. You can find it there when you're ready. There is still, through the Small Business Administration, SBA, there is still an economic injury disaster loan. This has been available most of the year, and that is a loan, not a grant, but that is an option that continues to be available. Coming soon, the NOAA Fisheries CARES Act, also called Section 12005. This is a little bit confusing because it's separate from the CARES Act, or Alaska CARES Act, that recently closed. This one will be opening soon. And let's see, most important things to know is this program kind of works with different states that are involved in the program. So Alaska residents should apply through the state of Alaska, and also non-residents who have an Alaska business license can apply through the state of Alaska. Washington residents who fish in Alaska can apply through the state of Washington. And to be eligible for this program, you have to be able to document a 35% loss, comparing this year to the last 5 years average. There are some other requirements that will probably apply to some more individuals, but I think the most important thing to say is this is not open yet. The different states have each had to approve they call them spend plans, but they're plans for eligibility and getting the money to people. So they are in the process of getting those approved, and both Alaska and Washington should be available anytime. They expect their review back anytime. The applications will be available first at the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, this website here, psmfc.org. Again, we have links to all of this, and I'm happy to try to help with any questions. These programs have been complicated and changing a lot too, so please do keep your eye on it, and I'm happy to help how I can.
Thank you, Frances. And I guess this is just our typical homepage. And if you are looking for that COVID economic, or any financial assistance guidance, you can find it here at this button, or go down to For the Fleet, and you'll see COVID aid there as well. Or just reach out to us if you have questions. That's, we're here to help you guys. With that, we'll move into our market update, and I want to welcome to the meeting Janice Schreiber. She's going to kick us off here and take us through some slides. So Janice, take it away.
Sure. So I kind of just wanted to start out with just kind of an overview of kind of the salmon market landscape in the United States, and touch more closely on the farm side of things. So if you go to the first slide, Andy. So here's the landscape that is coming in for fresh fillets from into the U.S. market. There is a very close relationship with the United States and the country of Chile. They're kind of these natural trading partners. As you can see here, Chile has an extremely dominant market share for fresh farmed fillets, and that's the majority of what you're going to see at the retail counter. And with COVID, this relationship has kind of just gotten stronger. Actually, it's pretty insane. They farm the fish in the south of Chile, truck it up to Santiago, and then fly it fresh from Santiago into the United States. And somehow all those logistics are still working. And we see just an even higher volume of fresh fillets coming into the US market than we've seen ever. And certainly over what we saw in 2019. We do still see some product coming in from Europe as well. However, they've had a lot bigger issues as far as capacity is concerned and airline space. So the way they fly it in fresh, they fly it in on the bellies of airplanes with lockdown measures and less traveling going on. There's just less flights, and so less fish making its way, or if it's making its way here, sometimes it's rather cost prohibitive. Andy, if you can go to the next one. So with all, and we touched on it briefly when we were just chit-chatting before the meeting started, even though it is a farmed species, it is no stranger to extremely big upswings and downswings when it comes to price. This is a 10-year graph of the price of 3 to 4 pound Chilean fresh fillets. And as you can tell, this is way prior to COVID or the pandemic or whichever. It's always seen a lot of volatility. And truthfully, more recently, in the month of October of 2019, they saw some significant riots and protesting in the country of Chile, which really started off some more significant upswings and downswings, as you can kind of see there towards the end of the graph. And then the most recent very steep dip was about in April, once the U.S. was really into the core of the pandemic. And Andy, if you just go to the next one. So these are some of the things that have happened in the country of Chile that, you know, kind of that are outside factors that affect the production and affect the transportation of, you know, of that fresh fish into the U.S. market. You have earthquakes, you have volcanoes, like I mentioned, you have protesting, and then you also have, you know, outside things as far as the country of China citing that they tested a positive COVID on a cutting board, and therefore, you know, there's no more, you know, the amount of fish going into China right now from Chile is really small. And so, and even out of Norway as well. And so it's just this constant shifting, you know, kind of around the world. And right now, the US has been the one that's the most open for right now. And so we've really seen a lot of volume come into the US market from the country of Chile. If you go to the next one. And then just to kind of touch on the whole fish landscape, here our natural trading partner is the country of Canada. Prior to the pandemic, we were actually seeing Canada's market share start to shrink. As you can see there in 2019, that was kind of the case for like the previous 3 years. And when COVID hit, again, a natural trading partner to the north easily can truck fish down into the US market. We saw their share increase, and we saw the countries out of Europe decrease. And we also, a trend that we've seen there as well is Chile is sending more and more fresh whole fish into the US market. Not an all-time high here as far as whole fish is concerned, but still, when you look at year-to-date volume, still pretty far up there with all the other years, even, you know, during the pandemic. The next slide. And then again, this is just kind of to show a little bit about the price volatility. This is the farm salmon index. So it's a weighted average of whole fish, of fillet for the European countries, for Canada, and for Chile, kind of all wrapped into one. And if we showed it, if I updated it from when we reported yesterday, we are seeing a little bit more of an uptick, which is somewhat abnormal heading into the week before Thanksgiving, but things are tightening up a little bit. Down in Chile, we've been hearing about them concentrating a little bit more on some frozen commitments. And we've also heard about the rise in COVID cases. So at the plants, they've had to do more social distancing. So we'll see how things, you know, end up, you know, in the month of November. But speaking to December, as you can see, you know, from 2019 and even in 2018, we typically do see a higher demand period coming up. You know, no holiday parties this year, but it's still an extremely popular item at retail. So we'll see what happens there. And I think that's it. Oh, and then for just kind of touching on some of the pricing that we have for fresh whole sockeyes, as you can see, you know, 2020 did, especially towards you know, the end of July onward, track pretty much above that 3-year average. And you know, obviously with some of the headwinds that started at the beginning of the season, you know, things did start getting reported a little bit later than we've seen in the past. However, you know, certainly did end the year above the 3-year average.
Thank you very much, Janice. If anybody has any questions for Janice, I'll maybe ask you to raise your hand or put it in the question and answer box. But while we're waiting for that, why don't we have our guests from Tradex tell us what they're seeing going on in the marketplace.
I think what I'll do is pass that along to Nathan and Rob, because they're the ones with their finger on the pulse right away.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in here. You know, so much uncertainty this year, as everyone knew. But you know, at the beginning of the year, I think because there was so much panic, we saw some really low sockeye prices, which also helped with sales. Fresh sales were pretty strong. Moving into the frozen sales, demand stayed strong all the way through. And kind of what we're seeing now is a lull in inventories and stuff like that, which has driven the price a little higher. Moving into January, I have a feeling there is not going to be many options for sockeye. All the signs are pointing to it being cleaned out before then. You know, smaller fish are harder to come by. You know, your 4.6s, that's basically the only thing we're able to find on the market. And unless programs start falling apart and, you know, stuff starts coming loose, commitments start dropping, I really can't see us, you know, seeing much more sockeye on the market. So I think it's going to hold its price where it's at, you know, which was higher than where it opened, obviously. But I think one of the things everyone needs to keep in account is the cost that goes into this, the financing, the processing, the storing. You know, these are all things that contribute to the price of the sockeye going up from the frozen point. So speculating on pricing at the beginning of the year doesn't make any sense. It's really hard. As for retail, which I believe retail drove the sockeye this season more than anything, just because of COVID, Nathan can probably comment on that and elaborate a little more than I would be able to. Oh, you're muted, Nate.
There we go. That's better. Thank you, Rob.
There you go.
Just to elaborate a little more on that on the retail, you know, what we saw from the beginning of COVID was really, really strong sales of sockeye in retail. Now, my personal perspective on this is that the economy is as such that if you were used to going to a restaurant once, twice, 3 times a week, and when you went to a restaurant, you had your protein of choice, and you're not going to restaurants anymore, when you go to a supermarket, you're picking your protein of choice. So a lot of people would choose sockeye, and it became very popular. There was lots of retail programs, not only in refreshed fillets and bag programs, but a huge demand. Now, coming back into the summer, these retail programs didn't stop. They were using frozen fish and fresh fish during the summer, and everybody's keeping the train rolling. So coming into this year, there's a high demand for retail programs to support the sockeye salmon. Now, in saying that, one of the things you can see throughout these slides in today's presentation is the lower price of farmed salmon. Now, with farmed salmon being at a lower price, the market is only going to bear so much price per pound on sockeye, even if it's the preferred protein for salmon. And I think everyone needs to be aware of that it's only going to bear so much. Now, what we've also seen in the past years in food service is that when Atlantic salmon is lower in price, people will switch from sockeye to Atlantic salmon. And I think that's something we all need to be aware of, that price does drive to a certain extent what kind of salmon is purchased on the market.
Well, you can even see it now with wild salmon prices are high. Sockeye is very high right now in comparison. And you can see the sales in our case. We move a lot of sockeye. We move a lot of Alaskan salmon anyways, but sockeyes are one of our #1 sellers. And I've watched the sales drop pretty much day to day. And I attribute that to, there's a number of factors, obviously, and it's a strange world we live in, but it's still, as soon as it hits a price point and gets into, you know, over that, I don't even know, I can't even tell you which dollar figure, but anything over $10 a pound or $11 a pound or $8.50, $9.50, as soon as it starts reaching those pinnacles, it starts to slow down. And when the alternative is to feed a family of 4 at a farmed Atlantic that's coming out at whatever, $3.50, $4 a pound, in comparison to double for a sockeye. People take that into consideration. It makes a big difference. And again, your other choice of protein is not just salmon or wild salmon and farm salmon. It's also chicken, beef, and pork. So, you know, you have those to contend with as well. And I think I mentioned to somebody the other day, you know, in this city where we live in Canada, you can buy a whole roast chicken, cooked, barbecue, ready to go with a salad for $8.95. And that could feed a family of 4 for sure. So, you know, those are all the factors that you have to consider. And just when you see it going up to a certain level, I've been doing this for over 30 years now. As soon as it hits that upper level, and I'm not saying what that upper level is, it seems to change over the year and each year is different. But as soon as it gets over that $9, $9.50, $10 mark, it starts changing, you know, for fillets. It starts slowing sales down rapidly.
Thank you guys very much for that. We had a question come in from Tom and Katie Birch. What is the climate for fillet size? Are the smaller fish we are seeing in Bristol Bay bad for price?
Who's that directed to?
Probably the Tradex guys.
What was the question again?
Sorry. What is the climate for fillet size? And are the smaller fish we are seeing in Bristol Bay bad for price?
I don't know. What do you guys feel, Nathan and Rob?
Well, from what I see this year is that, you know, the 2 to 4 H&G is virtually unavailable in the marketplace. And the 4 to 6 is predominant. So I'd actually say, you know, there's somewhat to the opposite where, you know, the 2 to 4s, which would give you a better fillet price just because of the price differential between a 2 to 4 and a 4 to 6. When you take a look at the cost per fillet, you're actually stuck in a market where whatever sockeye you want, you've got to take some relatively bigger fillet sizes, which would be like, you know, a 1.3 to maybe a 1.8 versus other years where you'd predominantly have, if you were cutting from 2 to 4s, a 0.75 to, if you're lucky, maybe a 1 or a 1.1. So I'm seeing that you're going to have higher prices this year in fillets on the market versus lower prices for a smaller fillet. I think that, you know, a lot of processors and a lot of people who have programs have probably kept the 2 to 4s and they're going to specific programs as opposed to being sold off to other processors who would then process during the year. So I believe in, you know, some years a lot of H&G is released and then reprocessed for programs that aren't in place at the beginning of the year. And what you're seeing this year is a lot of processors and a lot of programs that were working from midway through last year, let's say December, January, February, into February 2020, that they're already pre-committed this year for existing programs.
So a lot of that smaller fish has been pre-committed and you're not seeing that sort of on the spot market, right?
You got taken out of the market right away.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even us, we're a very big purchaser of both sizes. And for us, it was gone within a 3-day span of starting to negotiate, gone completely. So where it went, I'm not too sure.
And I just to add to that too, with the smaller fish size being bad for price, I can't say that I totally agree with that. I think traditionally different markets went after different sizes. We all know what the Japanese would prefer over the Europeans. And since then, everyone's kind of transitioned to different sizes. But it took the market a while before they accepted all these different sizes. And I think slowly the price is building up on both of them. And cutting from smaller fish, that seems to be the trend for fillets. I think Nathan might be able to agree on the retail aspect, but those 1 to 2 pound fillets seem to be pretty predominant out there.
Yeah, and like you said, Rob, just to for everyone on the line, I mean, the Japanese buyers tend to prefer smaller fish, whereas the Europeans have a lot, there's more smoked fish over there, and they need larger fish to go into their, the machinery that they have. And so that, tends to be where you see the stratification. Would you guys be able to provide any sort of range of kind of where, you see 2 to 4 frozen H&G sockeye at versus 4 to 6, kind of currently or recently?
Well, I think, just because of the lack of inventories for frozen 2-4s, we're seeing higher prices than I've ever seen. I mean, we're getting towards that, mid 3s, getting towards 4s, and on the bigger fish, you're in the mid 4s. Again, quality is key, and people will always pay more for better fish. So to say exactly where it is, it's really hard. It's a moving target at this point.
Since we have a lot of fishermen on, and I think this is a really great chance to have a company further down the supply chain being able to talk to fishermen, can you give maybe our audience a little bit of a sense of how much those discounts have to be if the quality isn't there? You mentioned certainly higher quality fish sell better, sell for a higher price, but how much are you talking about having to take off the price if it's subpar quality?
Nathan's really well versed in recoveries and stuff like that, and essentially that's kind of what it all comes down to. So I'm sure he can add to this piece, but at the end of the day, it's the recovery off the H&G into fillet. If your fish is bruised, and we've seen it in previous years where people are pulling them out of nets and they're snapping the tails, and you almost every fish you're seeing from one run, I guess, has a broken tail and it's got a big bruise in it, and that's going to add to the loss. So it all depends. Nathan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I first want to say that this year, and Rob Ryerson had mentioned this before, the quality is good this year. There's few and far between claims this year. So we're traditionally, even if processors would put up #1 quality fillets, you'd still have, going through those #1 quality fillets, some #2s, or there'd be #2 quality fillets that would come direct from the processors. There's still really good quality this year. So this year isn't really a good example. For most years, as Rob McNutt was talking about, it comes down to what you're going to get from your H&G. So right now, if we were to use, let's say, a #2 H&G fish and offer it to processors or process it ourselves, the price and the discount really reflects on how much yield you're going to get. If you're going to get half the normal yield, it's going to have to be a more of a discount. If you're going to get the same sort of yield, you've got a really good buy. So it all depends on the yield. And it's not just on the yield if it's all good flesh. If you've got deep bruising, more needs to be cut out. Also the quality, if it's soft, if it doesn't smell as nice, if the skin isn't as nice, there's a whole bunch of factors. But the better quality fish that can be produced, which really goes towards the quality programs that your organization has. I was hearing about ice on the barges and discounted ice bags. I think that really goes a long way to keeping the quality up and keeping the product price up and helping everybody along the lines. I also wanted to mention that once the fish leaves the fisherman's hands and goes to the processing plant, everything is really smoothly processed effectively and efficiently if you have all of your orders for the end customer at the beginning of the season. A processing plant can process that all, assuming it's a non-COVID year and you've got all your staff, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't necessarily know what products are going to be required January, February, March, 6 to 8 months later. And because of that, you can have products that's processed into H&G then processed into fillets, and then maybe thawed out and processed into a tray pack. So that end retail cost that you get in the retail supermarket doesn't necessarily accurately reflect all the production costs that are in there. The production cost doesn't stop once it leaves the processing plant. There's a lot of hands, transportation, storage, financing, marketing, et cetera, that takes this product through to the end consumer. And I think that's something that everybody needs to realize here.
Thank you for laying that out, Nathan. And, you know, I think what I'm hearing you say is if there are quality defects, whether it's due to temperature or handling or you know, a whole number of things, you know, that's fish that's not sold, that's waste that has to be paid for by, you know, the fish that is saleable quality, which goes back to Tim's point. That's, you know, that's one of the reasons why quality is such an important thing in what we try to do. And obviously the processors and the fishermen have, you know, the most direct way to affect that. We try to support quality improvement as much as we can, wherever we can, because yeah, we understand that if you're not able to get that yield off that fish, then you're not going to be, you know, that's waste that has to get kind of passed down and passed on, and value that's not realized. So I appreciate you kind of taking that apart for us. It's very helpful.
One phenomenon that did happen over the last 2 years, though, is that typically when you're a purchaser of any volume of any salmon, but in particular sockeye, there used to be a 10 to sometimes 15 cents difference between a number one and number two. Then the pricing changed and it closed the gap more to 10 cents. And I seen as little as 5 cents a pound difference in number two quality this year. And that's because the number two quality was better than I've seen in a long time. One of the things we do here in regard, you might or might not know, but we inspect pretty much every pound of fish we purchase. So we have we have more QC people on staff than we have salespeople. We have independent parties everywhere looking at the quality of the fish that we purchase. And we do real thorough inspections. And that's again why I said we saw a lot less number twos. But when there was number twos, the quality difference was either super dramatic or very negligible. So, you know, kudos to the people that are processing the fish. They're getting it better. Everybody understands you're going to get more from a one than a two. It's nice to see the twos are getting a little more recognition as well.
Very good. Very, very good to hear. We have a question from Keith Singleton that says, as to quality, is there one brand better than the next?
You're asking the wrong guys who will promote our own brand.
Very good.
I'm gonna add one piece to that. You know, we're working with one of the last wild hunted proteins in the world. So to say one brand over the other, I mean, yeah, I'm a Tradex, I bleed orange, but that's a really tough question to answer.
I think they were probably talking about from the primary processors.
Yeah, it's more about the river, right? It's more about the river system and the quantity of fish going through the system. You know, the Fraser River used to be coveted fish. The Skeena, the Nass up in British Columbia were super coveted fish. It just really look at Copper River. You know, again, you know, it's the river system and the quantity. You know, if we all remember, nobody likes to say it because it probably was a bad word, but one time Bristol Bay didn't have the best history and they didn't have the best quality. But look at what you've done since then. So now from our point of view, when we sell our salmon fillets or we sell H&G product, when we say it's Bristol Bay, we don't cringe anymore like we might have 15 years ago. It's a far superior product. So it's really what you guys are doing and what the fishermen are doing at their level that is going to create the brand better than another brand, meaning the production facility. But it's the volume and the river system and how the volume is handled is really how people still purchase a lot of fish, especially in Europe. And I'm sure in Japan. Japan's not a big market for us, so I can't speak for it. I hear a lot of information from it. But in the European market, which is quite large for us, and the North American market doesn't seem as educated. The European does because it smokes so much of the fish. They're very brand particular, which is catch area and quantity. I mean, we had it. I think Rob was telling me, and I saw a lot of this year. You're down to the time the fish is on the dock that people are asking you for that particular lot. Whereas they never used to ask those questions because they know that on that day, 1 million pounds of fish came in and you had 3 docks to process it and you had maybe enough ice to deal with it. They know that was a bad day. I'll take the day before. They'd only got 100,000 pounds of fish. And so they're getting very sophisticated. And that doesn't just happen in Bristol Bay. It happens in other catch areas too. So it's hopefully that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. Okay, well, I think unless I don't see any hands up or any more questions for you guys, so I'm gonna get us going through the rest of the slide deck here. And so there's a few different things on this market analysis, and again, this is all trying to provide as much transparency as we can about where the market's at. I'm gonna pull out what I think is the most relevant for this discussion and conversation, and we'll have a discussion after I get through these slides, but I'm going to wait on answering questions until we get to the end. If you want to see more nitty-gritty details, there is a link here to our market and value page, and I invite you to go there and kind of nerd out and find more of the data. But I'm going to cover 6 things here, about pricing, this sort of black box situation that we have. Take a look at, the uniqueness of 2020. We're going to look beyond Bristol Bay and kind of widen our context out a little bit, not just beyond Bristol Bay in terms of different regions that processors have exposure to, but also, further down the supply chain. And then we'll talk about some of the things we don't know and that are, more difficult to quantify. So with that, I just want to point out some things that Rob and Nathan were speaking to, which is the price difference between farmed Atlantics and Sockeye. You can see that basically this is the average retail promotional price. And, right now, your typical supermarket in the US, and this data comes from Urner Barry, they have a pretty large sample of grocery stores out there that they compile the weekly specials for. And when you average that price out, it's sitting around $6.50 for Atlantics, and we're up closer to $11.50 for this on average this year. So that's the widest that gap's been, at least since 2012 and probably well before. Now, whether we can hold that big gap, we'll see how long it takes to narrow that. I mean, supply is a big factor here, and there's not as much sockeye globally this year, and there's plenty of farm salmon on the market. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. But I think certainly there's a subset of buyers out there that, they wouldn't buy farm salmon basically at any price. And then you've got consumers who are going to, decide what to buy based on price. So, it's kind of a mix, and it's difficult to quantify exactly how many of one group there are or the other, but that will sort of shape how this gap behaves going forward.
Hey, Andy.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a question that's kind of related to this that fell through the cracks. It's what is the price ceiling where consumers shift from sockeye consumption to farmed fish?
You can almost see it in the graph.
Yeah, I think when you get up to about $11 a pound, in the past, it's come down. I'll point out that we had a shorter supply during 2013. And so, we started to get more fish into the supply chain 2014, 15, 16, and really, but, even though we had a lot of fish in Bristol Bay and globally, we saw pricing increase at retail from 2015 through 2019. We saw really prices increase all the way through the supply chain, including to fishermen, obviously up until this year. So yeah, I think that $11 a pound, that's a price point where it gets difficult at. And keep in mind, this is promotional price. So this is what you might see it on for special or sale. So that means your everyday retail price, could be up around $15 or more even in some cases. Thanks for that, Leilani.
Yeah, thank you for showing that perfectly. Good timing.
Hey, Andy, while we're on this subject, this is Tim.
Sure, go ahead.
One of the things, and I guess this is a question and just a thought, how much pressure is there on retailers to start counterfeiting or selling Atlantics for Sockeyes? I'm wondering if anybody at Tradex has any thoughts on that.
Not quite sure the question.
Mislabeling.
Oh, mislabeling.
How much more pressure is there to mislabel Atlantics as wild salmon? I assume that as the price goes up, the pressure goes up.
Yeah, I'm not too, I couldn't really answer that one. I mean, mislabeling is rampant in the whole industry, and it's something that needs to be taken a lot deeper consideration to. We face it every day in the days of our lives here at Tradex Foods, and we spend a lot of money counteracting it, and we spend a lot of money trying to educate, and it all falls on deaf ears because it works out to be a price. And that's where you're going to find it. That's where you're going to find the mislabeling. But I don't personally have never seen any difference with any mislabeling with Atlantic stuff to wild. I've not seen that. Robert, Nathan, do you know anything?
I'll add to that. I think it's the unsavory characters that are mislabeling farm salmon to be sockeye to get more money for it. I think these people are repeat offenders. I don't think it gets to a price gap where they're like, okay, we have to do this. I think it's just it's ingrained in these people to cheat the end customer, and they don't just do it with salmon. They're doing it with, grouper and snapper and a couple other things. But I think it's a select few that will repeat offend, and it doesn't really have to do with price.
The retailer themselves, to me, would seem to be more of ignorance than anything else. But I can't qualify.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's not always intentional. And I think because of the color difference between farmed and sockeye, there's for people who know anything about salmon, it's a pretty stark difference. So
Lindsay Schreiber to go home, please.
Oops, there we go. All right, well, let's move on. And there's a lot of going on this slide. I apologize, but I'll try to pull out the relevant pieces here. And since we're recording this, you can later on pause it and go through it to your heart's delight. But I mean, back the last time we saw base prices this low, we saw H&G prices in the sub 250 range, and certainly we don't have that now. Kind of how this compares. I mean, we've seen retail fillets inch up and up in price, and we've seen the fish, the ex-vessel price go up since 2015, and up until this year. And 2013 and 2014, there's kind of a whole story there too as far as why those prices were higher. 2013 was a very relatively small harvest for Bristol Bay, and then you had Silver Bay coming in, which prompted the higher 2014 price. But I think I tried to look at the difference between the frozen H&G and the final Bristol Bay ex-vessel price, adjusting for the difference in weight. And it comes out to about an average of $1.34 back to 2011. And certainly we're above that right now. I think, this data comes from the state right here, this 328, and this 334 comes from the U.S. Department of Commerce. These prices, especially this price here, seems a lot lower than what we've heard anecdotally from, not just sources like Tradex, but others in the supply chain. So that's a little bit of a head scratcher. And when you look at the relationship between export and this first wholesale price that the state of Alaska puts out, typically exports are a fair amount lower, the average price is. And that's for a number of reasons, but this year that's not what the data is saying. So we'll keep an eye on that.
There was a lot of, for export, there was a lot of inventory still remaining from the prior year. A lot, like people had some of our clients weren't even anticipating buying 2020 because they had so much still from 2019. So that could have really been, that would throw a real jar into that number.
Well, I would think that would probably be sold for less than 2020 product, right? If it was exported.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll keep an eye on it, but it sort of stands out because this is lower than that, which is not usually the case. So that's kind of point number 2. You know, and point number 3, the other years that we saw a big difference between what H&G was selling for versus the ex-vessel price. You know, 2017, 2018, I'm sure the fishermen on this call, you know, realized those were the years where they got a profit sharing or retro checks. You know, I think because there was a healthy margin between those two. But, you know, I'll say 2020 is unique, which we'll talk about in a minute. So those are the things that kind of stand out to me about this data. But I think it's interesting to sort of, you know, compare where we're at now versus in previous years. Number 2, I mentioned in the points I'm going to cover, kind of how the value of this fishery gets allocated by the market and this black box that we have. So the actual definition of a black box is something that has unknown internal functions or mechanisms. And I think that kind of describes what we have in Bristol Bay, which is fishermen put their fish into the system and money comes out the other side, but there doesn't appear to be a lot of rhyme or reason or transparency about that. However, you know, if you can see from this graph, this black box approach has produced some good results for fishermen over the past several years. You know, and this year we could be headed for some differences, which we're going to continue to get into here. But basically, I made a guesstimate at, you know, if we saw the first wholesale value lag by about 10%, we'd kind of wind up a little under $500 million for the first wholesale value of Bristol Bay sockeye. And we know that you guys got paid a base price of 70 cents. So that works out to, I think, about 140 million. And then, you know, we don't know, who knows what the bonuses or adjustments are going to be. So a lot of question marks here, but it certainly looks a lot different than what we've seen. And I'll say this about what we've seen: as we see the value of sockeye go up and the total wholesale value go up as well as prices, you know, theoretically the raw material should be worth more because it costs what it costs to process it, ship it, retail it, do all the other things. And so if there's enough competition in the system, you should see the raw material price adjust, and that is what we've seen. So there's reasons to dislike the black box, but there's also reasons to say, well, you know, it's worked in some of these other years, and it's behaving, you know, okay up until this year. So I'm going to keep moving forward. And like I said, we can come back to any of these if there's questions. So, you know, a big part of why everyone's here today is to understand why the fishery price was so low and maybe discuss what happens from here. So I'm going to talk more about why 2020 was different and what that means. We estimate there's probably, you know, we've heard from processors that they spent about $50 million statewide for direct COVID costs. That means it's probably around 20 to 30 million for the Bay. And that would work out to about 10 to 12 cents per round pound. Another key thing here is that processors had to pay these costs up front for the most part. So that drained on the amount of financial capital that they had to work with. workforce disruptions, not having enough labor, and then this compressed run were really kind of, I don't want to say a perfect storm, but they weren't ideal in terms of a processor's ability to put up the products that they want to put up. You know, for anybody that's direct marketing and bought back fillets this year, you know that they're very expensive. And that is because there was not a lot of once frozen fillets produced, at least not as much as you'd expect with, you know, with a run as big as we had, 200 million pounds of sockeye. Because of COVID, there's also restaurants and distributors that rely on restaurants that are struggling. So you have, you know, you have more retail demand, but you also have fewer buyers in sort of in the market. And then you've got this risk aversion. You've got this risk premium. I mean, more than ever before, none of us can seem to predict what the next couple weeks looks like, and that risk is always factored into pricing. So I think that's a big one that you know, probably affected Bristol Bay this year, although it's difficult to quantify. And then of course, COVID costs. You know, Bristol Bay fishermen had COVID costs, so did processors, and it continues on down the line. So, you know, COVID costs aren't something that are just unique to the processors you're selling to. They it factors into things further down the supply chain as well. So that's kind of the unique 2020 factors. I want to look a little bit ahead, and actually I think I'm going to go to the next slide and come back to this one. I'll go to the next two. So I think the perception is that we've got Bristol Bay salmon, and depending on what the volume is, the wholesale prices and demand, and the cost to process it, and then what fishermen's break-evens are, you know, what they need to turn a profit, that somehow gets us to like an X vessel price. But I think what this year seems to be telling us is that in reality, if you're a processor, and it, you know, right now it's up to them to figure out how much they're paying you for fish. They have to look at their operation across all species and across, you know, all of their processing operations. So, you know, we're just part of these. We're just part of the picture for these processors, and I think that's almost impossible to say that doesn't, you know, that could not have an effect on what they're able to pay for Bristol Bay sockeye. I mean, at the end of the day, these processors have to remain solvent in order to stay in business. And, you know, if other operations are not, you know, are not as producing as much or as profitable, or maybe they're even losing money, then that's got to be made up somewhere. So, you know, I thought about underlining it here. I guess I didn't have time, but I mean, really the question for any buyer of any product and commodity is, what is the lowest price I need to pay? So it's not really about what is a fair price or unfair. It's just, I have needs, I have customers that I'm going to pass this fish along to and sell to, and, you know, what's the price I need to pay to secure my supply? And so that's, you know, that gets us to where the prices eventually go. But I'll back up here a second and say, in the past, on these presentations, I've tried to quantify, okay, here's how much fishermen get, and here's how much is left over for primary Bristol Bay processors. And that has tended to, I think, do a pretty good job of predicting where the X vessel price is going. But this year it didn't. You know, what we heard anecdotally from processors was that 2020 was a brutal year. Oh, it was awful. We didn't make any money, or we lost a bunch. You know, it's just really hard. And when I looked at the data for Bristol Bay, I was like, well, that margin was down some, but not catastrophically so. And so, you know, what's going on? I think we have to look beyond Bristol Bay and say, what is that gross margin or that net processing revenue for the entire Alaska salmon industry? And so I'll I'll caveat this by saying that this is kind of the best data that I could get right now. It looks at calendar year versus calendar year. So fish are caught in the summer and they're sold throughout the next 10, 12 months generally. And so there's kind of a timing problem here, but I think it still kind of tells a decent story. So I'm not going to say these numbers are sort of set in stone, but I think if you sort of squint, you can get the general trend, which is we had a pretty stable first wholesale value through 2017. Things got a lot better in 2017 and 2018, but that margin is compressing for processors. And, you know, they came into 2020 with less, with less financial capital, I believe. And 2020, because we had, I believe, the 8th smallest harvest since 1976, plus you have COVID on top of that, it's not looking like a very good year for total wholesale value. We'll probably, I mean, my guesstimate here says a 15% increase for pink prices and a 20% increase for chum, static for sockeye. If we get a little bit better pricing for sockeye, well, coho is so small it doesn't really move the needle, but you know, maybe we get over $1 billion here, but it's still far less than these prior years. And then there's about 50 million here in COVID costs. It's that first black line. We know that the preliminary ex-vessel value of Alaska salmon was just under 300 million. So, you know, that ex-vessel value has gone from here down to here. Now, this might creep up as more adjustments and retro payments come in, but certainly fishermen have felt a ton of compression, either through low prices or poor harvests. And processors have seen some compression in 2022, in 2020 as well. So things are not looking particularly good for either sector this year. So I'm going to go to the next one, and this just kind of puts some numbers to what I was talking about. You know, this net processing revenue across all of Alaska, best sort of rough estimate is about 900 million in 2017, and then we saw that compress down. And here's what I was talking about. I mean, back in 2014, it was very easy to see why the price was nosediving so much in 2015, because you had this substantial compression for the Bristol Bay processors. This year, you know, why is the price in 2020 70 cents? Okay, didn't see this bar before. So, well, we see compressing margins, but nothing like 2013 and 14. But here we have, you know, about $150 million coming out of the processor's end of it. So I think that, you know, and we'll get to some of the questions here, but some of the questions I'll pose as well as some I'm sure you'll have. But let's keep moving. So, like I said, you know, this leads to a big question. If a productive fishery is subsidizing struggling fisheries, is that okay with productive fishermen? And if so, for how long and to what degree? If it's not, what then? You know, how do we get this fishery value to reflect the market performance of the products that come from it? Because I think we all want to, you know, share in the reward of being able to, well, share in the reward of what you all produce, you know, which is high quality fish. And, you know, so if there are, if the problem is that other fisheries are not producing as well as they have in the past, and it costs too much to process it, then, you know, how can wild salmon fisheries across the state operate and process fish more efficiently during periods of more volatile runs? You know, how does the industry become more flexible? How does processor competition factor into this? I didn't have a chance to get the data into slides because I still want to get a little bit different cut of it from Fish and Game. But yeah, basically back in the 80s and 90s, there was quite a few floating processors in Bristol Bay, and adjusted for inflation, the prices were higher. And these days we have 5 to 6 floating processors, and just, fewer processors in general. So, I say there's pros and cons to that, because if you want to have a lot of competition among processors, there needs to be excess capacity. One processor needs to be able to have capacity to bid fish away from someone else and have a place to put it. But if you have that on a big scale, now you have a lot of excess capacity, and that needs to be paid for by the fish. So it's inefficient and wasteful if you look at it kind of from a 30,000 foot standpoint, but it does create competition. So I think, I think we're happy to take any suggestions about what fishermen or BBRSDA can do about the competition issue, or maybe, is it an issue? Good question for discussion. I think there's been a lot of focus on where does this 40 to 90 cents of round weight go? 40 cents to 90 cents of this fillet. Is that something that fishermen should get? Is it something processors should get? But let's sort of expand our thinking to all the way through the retail price. So if you've got a $15 fillet, what does that pay for? Where does that money go? And again, these are pretty rough estimates, but if you're a retailer, you're going to need to discount that product. So you're going to, maybe on average knock $1.20 off the price. When you sort of look at your whole year in totality, you are probably going to have some type of waste or shrink. And if that's 15% on a $15 fillet, that's going to cost you $2.25. You're going to have to employ labor. If you're at a traditional seafood case, we all walk up to, there's somebody behind it. You get to pick out a pound or two of seafood, and they wrap it up and hand it to you. There's a cost to having that person or persons there 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, if you're only moving $7,000 to $9,000 of seafood through that case a week, which seems like a pretty reasonable number, that has a significant cost. About 25% is what we sort of estimate, although, for some it could be as low as less than 10 if they're really, really efficient. And some are probably pushing 30% of their cost being retail labor. And then of course you've got other costs and profits sort of in the middle. Processor and distributors take about 385 of that. We're sort of looking at like, what's that wholesale value of a fillet minus what goes to fishermen, and that's kind of where we get these first two numbers from. And the fishermen, the 310, certainly fishermen are not getting that this year. It doesn't appear, but this is based on a fillet weight. So you basically want to like double, because it takes about 2 pounds of round weight fish to make 1 pound of fillets in rough terms. So, fishermen would, in this example, get 310. But I just want to, again, call attention. I mean, for the functions that are served by waste and retail labor, there's a significant cost there. It's huge. And so putting that into context, if we were to multiply this over an arbitrary figure of 50 million fillet pounds, that is roughly $150 to $225 million in retail labor, $75 to $150 million in waste and shrink. You can see the total combined cost there. And that's on par with the entire fishery value. And it certainly far, far exceeds, our budget. Not that I think we could necessarily solve all these problems with, a budget of $2 to $4 million. But I just kind of want to call attention to that there's good reason to think beyond just to the wholesale level, because there's a lot of costs further down for a variety of reasons. So talking about some of the unknowns, things that are difficult to well, I guess they're just unknown questions at this point. What sort of framework could eliminate open tickets? I think we had a question come in at the very beginning of our talk about, well, the last time that was tried, processors just put a nickel on the ticket and, kind of got around it that way. I think certainly there's going to have to be, if open tickets are done away with, you're probably talking about some sort of pricing contract that's tied to the value of that fish at some sort of wholesale level. And that could mean getting paid later. That would be something that fishermen would probably have to give up in order to get there. But I think that's something that really the different fleets, could negotiate with their processors. But yes, it's very difficult for a processor to say, I know that on June 1st, I can pay you a total price of, $1.75 because I know how much I'm going to sell that fish for over the next 12 months and all my costs and all, and how much I got to borrow and all that sort of thing. So I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. We don't know everything about processing profit margins and costs. We don't know everything about the profitability by region. I gave you some rough numbers that I think inform trends. I think that we've got to keep an eye on validating some of the first wholesale data. And then, like I was saying, actually, we had a great conversation about the cost of low quality product. How much does that discounting throughout the supply chain affect what the raw material is actually worth? So that kind of summarizes, I guess, some of the things that I've been hearing from a lot of you. I've talked to many fishermen on the phone. Definitely, we keep an eye on what conversations are on social media. And hopefully this was helpful. So with that, we'll kind of come to our discussion phase. And I'll say again, if you want to speak, please, there should be a button for attendees to raise your hand. You can type a question into the question and answer box. If you're a panelist and you want to ask the question, please type it into the chat. And you can always reach us later at info@bbrsda.com. So I'm going to end it there and see what we got. Looks like we have a question from David Harsla about commercial fishermen should consolidate through permit stacking to help themselves not be such a captive market for the processors. Processors have consolidated more than any time in the fishery history. So I guess more of a suggestion there than necessarily a question, but yeah, we have seen consolidation, certainly. Does anyone on our panel have anything to kind of offer in way of discussion points?
I'd just like to thank all the panelists and yourself and the rest of staff for the work you put into this and the presentation. Even though I'm part of the organization, I still learned a ton today, so I appreciate all the work everyone's put in.
Okay, well, boy, a lot of silence, and hopefully that means that there was, some good information here. And like I said, we'll post this up later, and if anything comes to you, feel free to reach out to us, and we can talk privately, or we can. We'll also have our Zoom booth open after this as well. So. Yeah, again, I just want to really thank our guests with Tradex and Janice, who fit us in a tight window between kid duty, and that was amazing. So thank you guys very much. And especially thank every attendee that was here today. We really appreciate you guys setting aside time in your day to hear this. And if you ever want to talk about anything, if there's anything we can do to help this fishery add value, become even better. If there's any improvements we can help make, please let us know.
I want to point, before we go, just to some events we have tomorrow, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Francis.
Yeah, so tomorrow is kind of the last day of the virtual Fish Expo, but we have some great things lined up. Andy will be on a Pebble panel on Pebble, and that's at 10 a.m. Alaska time, and that is linked on our website, but that's hosted through the National Fishermen Expo online. So I think you'll have to click through there, but you can get to it through our site. And at 1 p.m. there is a presentation from Seafood Analytics about the certified quality reader that I mentioned in the quality program presentation. So they'll go into a lot more detail there. It's really interesting. It's been exciting to learn about that. That's at 1. And there's a fisherman's happy hour at 4 p.m. that's hosted by the United Tribes of Bristol Bay and commercial fishermen for Bristol Bay and Salmon State. So that'll be a casual Pebble update. Regular a Pebble update and a casual opportunity for fishermen to chat and catch up. So that's at 4, and all those links are on our website.
All right, excellent. Well, everyone have a great rest of the week, and talk to some of you later. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Be safe.
Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you
Nice
very
to meet
much.
you.